We see not our signs. There is no more any prophet, neither is there among us any that knoweth how long. O God, how long shall the adversary reproach? Shall the enemy blaspheme thy name forever? Why withdrawest thou thy hand, even thy right hand, pluck it out of thy bosom? For God is my King of old, working salvation in the midst of the earth. Thou didst divide the sea by thy strength. Thou breakest the heads of the dragons in the waters. Thou breakest the heads of Leviathan in pieces, and gavest him to be meat to the people inhabiting the wilderness. Thou didst cleave the fountain and the flood. Thou driest up mighty rivers. The day is thine, the night also is thine. Thou hast prepared the light and the sun. Thou hast set all the borders of the earth. Thou hast made summer and winter. You see, the signs didn't disappear from Israel until after Titus had destroyed the temple in 70 Anno Domini. The signs of an apostle, 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 12, were there as long as the acts of the apostles, so-called, were being enacted. John is still alive in 90 Anno Domini. There is no more any prophet. John the Baptist shows up long after Nebuchadnezzar destroys the sanctuary. Ezekiel prophesies while it's being destroyed, and Daniel prophesies immediately after it's destroyed. Verse 9 lands you in this time and maybe onward. Its adversary who reproaches, verse 10. See Isaiah chapter 50 verse 8, and more especially 1 Peter chapter 5 verse 8. The adversary is engaged in blasphemy, verse 10. See Revelation chapter 13 verses 5 to 6 and Daniel chapter 11 verse 36. The scholars lost the truth trying to find the original intent of the original author in the original verbally inspired Hebrew original autograph. The situation is even worse than the Nicolaitans imagined, for in the context Moses and Elijah have come and gone. See Revelation chapter 11 verses 11 to 14. When he says there is no more any prophet, he is talking for a pitiful handful of Jews in Selah, Petra. See Lamentation chapter 5 verses 15 to 21, who are awaiting total annihilation after the post-tribulation rapture. All of the commentators, atheist, fundamentalist, Catholic, liberal, conservative, modernist, neo-evangelical, Orthodox and Jewish miss all the references again. Naturally, what else would you expect? There is nothing on this earth or in hell or heaven that will mess a Christian scholar up any worse than believing that his final authority in all matters of faith and practice is a pile of lost papers nobody ever read. Nothing on this earth, including Marxism, Darwinism, Papalism, or communism or whatever, could keep you from finding the truth any more than that. Why withdrawest thou thy hand? Why have you quit dealing with us? Pluck it out of thy bosom. Then it must have been put there before it was withdrawn. Moses shows how it was done, Exodus chapter 4, verse 6. God's right hand typifies the Lord Jesus Christ in Psalm chapter 17 verse 7, chapter 18 verse 35, chapter 20 verse 6, chapter 44 verse 3, chapter 48 verse 10, etc. God is addressed while hiding from Israel. Deuteronomy chapter 31 verses 17 to 18. He is sleeping, although this is plainly figurative. See Psalm chapter 121 verse 4 in the church age, as far as Israel is concerned. The king of old, verse 12, has to be a reference to the beginning of the theocracy when he was king in Jeshurun, Deuteronomy chapter 33 verse 5, and had armies, Exodus chapter 6 verse 26, chapter 7 verse 4, to fight for a nation, Genesis chapter 18 verse 18. Knowing this, the commentators now all run hell-bent for election in the verses 13 to 15 to deaden the impact of the revelation. Everything that doesn't fit the Red Sea crossing must be privately interpreted to apply it, so the reader will die on the spot with a commentator. The problem you might have quest it was them their dragons. The head of the New King James Version Committee, Arthur Farstad, jokes about them and says that no such thing ever existed, so they are removed from every reference in the Bible in every version but the King James Version. Thou breakest the heads of the dragons in the waters. Verse 13. You are to believe that these were cobras on the bottom of the Red Sea, if you bought yourself a New King James Version. They translated this Hebrew word as cobras in Psalm chapter 91 verse 13. The NIV did the same thing. The heads of Leviathan fares even worse. The New Bibles all teach you they believe that a crocodile has more than one head. For example, the New King James Version translators pulled their necks in at Job chapter 41 verse 1 and refused to say crocodile in so many words. Instead, they slipped through the cordon by saying a large sea creature, exact identity unknown. But Isaiah knew him and identified him, Isaiah chapter 27 verse 1. John knew him and identified him, Revelation chapter 12 verse 9. Job knew him and identified him, Job chapter 41 verse 1. Many and different kind of explanations are flying here and there when explaining these verses. The Arabic lexicographers quoted by Bockhart affirm that Pharaoh in the Egyptian language signified a crocodile, and Charles Haddon Spurgeon has borrowed this one. And even as the sea monsters were washed up on the shore and furnished food for the inhabitants of the Red Sea, so the symbolic dragon power of Egypt, when destroyed at the Red Sea, became food for Israel's fate, says Spurgeon again. Charles Haddon Spurgeon had many good writings, but doctrinally he has also many misunderstandings, and they are still in his books teaching something, whatever. If the reference is to Pharaoh's army in Exodus, then his troops are demons, verse 13. For dragons are manifestation of the dragon, the dragon, as devils, Mark chapter 16, verse 9, which are manifestations of the devil, the dragon, the devil. If the dragon means just Egypt, somebody dropped their lunch. Nebuchadnezzar is called a dragon in Jeremiah chapter 51 verse 34, and so is Pharaoh in Ezekiel chapter 29 verse 3. A great red dragon is neither Egypt, Pharaoh, nor Nebuchadnezzar. He is Satan, Revelation chapter 12 verse 9. Leviathan is no more a crocodile than a French poodle. He is typified on earth by the whale, Psalm chapter 104 verse 26, which put Jonah in pretty rough shape and puts the charismatics who believe in the sign of the fish in even worse shape. In actuality, the Leviathan described in Job chapter 41 is no more a crocodile or a dinosaur than he is a computer. He is a seven-headed dragon, and that is why text said heads in the plural instead of the singular, verse 14. Leviathan, typified by a whale, not a crocodile, has 7 heads, and one of them will be wounded to death. Revelation chapter 13 verse 3. This mutilated supernatural dragon will plead manna. Exodus chapter 16 verse 15, John chapter 6 verse 32 in the tribulation, and this manna will feed the people inhabiting the wilderness. See Micah chapter 7 verses 14 to 15, exactly as the parable Psalm chapter 78 verse 2 foretold. Asaph could prophesy he is not speaking of the Red Sea crossing in verses 13 and 14. There are dragons, and they are in the waters, but not the waters of the Red Sea. to locate this flood and these waters well above the solar system. No modern scholar would believe such matters if his soul depended on it, for he would fear ridicule worse than hell itself. Satan knows how to handle the intelligentsia of any age. The fountain and the flood may find some past historical reference to Israel, first wilderness sojourn, see Psalm chapter 114 verse 8. But the future references are much firmer, Psalm chapter 46 verse 3 and 107 verse 35. And they fit the next two verses much better, for there is no need to drag the day and the night and summer and winter into the context of Israel crossing the Red Sea 3,500 years ago. Many commentators say God reigns after commenting on his control over nature, verses 16 to 17. But God reigns at the second advent as Israel's king of old. Verses 16 and 17 went into the millennium, for the light of verse 16 is not the sun, it's the Son. Malachi chapter 4 verse 2, Revelation chapter 21 verse 23. God is light in 1 John chapter 1 verse 5, and the light referred to here is the light of Genesis chapter 1 verse 3, not the light of Genesis chapter 1 verse 16. Light precedes sunlight, so Einstein's speed of light was a joke. He meant the speed of light as you can measure it here, from Earth, where all the light came from the sun. As a type of the sun, sun of righteousness, light is first life, secondly beauty, third purity, and fourth health. The borders of the earth, verse 17, are the coastlines that separate the dry earth from the seas, Genesis chapter 1 verse 9 to 10. Summer and winter were made by God, and the fact that some men finally found out that they were caused by the movement of the earth around the sun and the tilt of the earth no more does away with the supernatural truth than the same men discovering that the moon is a dead satellite. God tilted the earth and set it in motion, Mark chapter 13 verse 19. Discovery of how God set the thing up no more eliminates God as the creator, designer, operator, owner, and sustainer than knowing how an automobile came into being eliminates a factory. Man mistakes chance discoveries for proof of his own deity. These fools who profess to be able to trace their ancestors back for 8 million years can't tell you where their kids were last night.